Late in the 1600s, Vienna became the turning point between two great powers. Several European states formed the Holy League while still juggling other wars. The story you're about to hear is how a siege grew into a years-long struggle shaped by logistics. At dawn, a courier leaves Vienna with a requisition list, not a letter of praise: horses, bread, powder, pontoon boats. In his satchel is the thing every early modern war runs on: numbers that must be turned into wagons that must become movement. Behind him, soldiers scrape frost from muskets, and quartermasters argue about who gets the first flour. The city is still breathing hard from a siege that wanted to squeeze it into memory. Ottoman war was a calendar as much as an army. Winter for audits, spring for the march, summer for the long tents of the imperial camp, autumn to decide what the scribe would write in the campaign book. The Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, counted timars and taxes and believed a big push could settle the frontier for a generation. He drew a line toward Vienna because lines on maps look simple when your pen is sure. On paper, both systems could do this forever. The Habsburgs had magazines, great barns of grain and powder along the rivers, and a bureaucracy that learned, slowly and expensively, to pay men on time. The Ottomans had a machine that had conquered 3 continents, provincial cavalry bound by land grants, janissaries on cash stipends, and a logistics web that braided roads, ferries, and state bakeries into something like inevitability. But inevitability needs bread, and bread needs punctual money. Take one day under the walls. Sappers push galleries through clay, measuring with the taste of earth in their mouths. Inside, powder is hoisted up by rope because stairs break concentration. A baker cuts loaves thin and learns how many slices a garrison can forgive. An engineer runs his hand along a bastion face and calculates whether the enemy mines will meet his countermine by sundown. On the ridge to the west, scouts count fires in the Ottoman camp and lie a little in their report so that fear doesn't do what artillery cannot. Relief arrived in layers, not as a miracle. Envoys hammered together a holy league that looks tidy in retrospect. Habsburgs, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth under King John III Sobieski, Venice, and soon Russia. But in the moment, it was bargaining and letters and promises about who would cross which river when. A bishop swore an oath over a map. A paymaster counted coins into a sack that would not survive the road. Sobieski's riders hit the ridge above the Ottoman camp on a September day, and the story remembers the charge because hooves are easier to film than invoices. The charge worked because the invoices had too. Fodder cached, roads scouted, crossings held, signals agreed. Defeat began a second war, the race to turn a lifted siege into a retreat into a rout into a map. The Holy League moved not as one fist, but as fingers that sometimes clenched. Habsburg columns went for Buda, the old Hungarian capital they had talked about retaking for a lifetime. Pontoon trains creaked down the Danube. Polish contingents guarded flanks. Imperial infantry learned to live inside Vaubanesque lines and to mine countermines with steadier hands. Buda fell in 1686 after assaults that taught officers the cost of ladders measured wrong. Mohács gave up its field in 1687, and for once, the name that had spelled disaster in 1526 read in the other direction. Vienna exhaled. The court in Pressburg turned the victory into law, making Habsburg rule in Hungary hereditary. Victories like to be notarized. Venice fought its own war across water and stone. The Serenissima levered the crisis into a Marian campaign, galleys, Greek island harbours, and cannon dragged up to walls that had listened to the sea for 1,000 years. Venetian engineers left neat diagrams and messy ruins. In Athens, the powder kept in the Parthenon answered a Venetian shell, and the hill learned a new silence. Crews who were paid by share argued about how much courage the ledger could afford. The war taught them that every bastion demands a ledger twice its size. On the frontier, the Ottoman machine tried to reset. Köprülü-era habits, discipline, audits, punishment for officers who used soldiers as private purses were revived in memoranda that promised the old sharpness. New janissaries were enrolled. Old ones were told to find their ranks. Provincial cavalry were recalled to standards that had not seen them in years. Belgrade changed hands like a struck coin, imperial, then Ottoman again. A Grand Vizier fell in battle. Another rose with orders to shorten the bleeding. In the imperial camp, imams blessed the standards. In Istanbul, coffeehouses turned rumour into policy for an afternoon. The empire still knew how to build a camp that looked like order, but order without punctual cash is a tent in wind. Russia entered like winter, slow at first, then everywhere. Southward pressure on the steppe forts and the Azov coast tugged Ottoman attention out of the Danube basin. Shipwrights in far inland timber yards built boats for a sea some of them would never see. A Tsar learned to swear at rope and wind. Azov listened in 1696, and the Black Sea heard a new voice at its northern edge. A war that began at Vienna had more than one center of gravity now. The bigger a front gets, the more it punishes treasuries. The more treasuries ache, the more soldiers learn the taste of late pay. What does a year of this look like up close? On the Habsburg side, recruiting warrants pinned to tavern beams. A wagon train commander swearing at axle grease that freezes wrong. Paymasters counting copper kreuzer into tall hats. Engineers measuring a glacis with knotted cord. Sutlers boiling meat that still tastes like river. On the Ottoman side, provincial scribes totaling arrears, tax farmers advancing cash against next year's dues and demanding interest in men, janissary odors arguing about precedence while the imperial bakery kneads without sleep, cavalry remounts dying because someone promised fodder he did not have the power to deliver. Battles were decided twice, once by shot and once by paperwork. Zenta in 1697 reads as a sudden thing on the Tisza River. Imperial forces catching an Ottoman army mid-crossing. Bridges tangled with bodies, the imperial camp burned. But the surprise paid off because weeks of scouting and a chain of orders made it possible to be in the right place at the right hour with powder dry. The same sentence explains victories that look less cinematic. Trench lines closed because somebody's ledger matched this week. Both sides were changing even as they fought. The Habsburgs learned to divide labor by rivers and seasons. Austria pushed along the Danube spine. Venice worked the seas and fortresses of Greece. Poland secured the southeastern marches. Russia dragged anchors south until Azov looked north. Commanders who failed were retired to titles. Commanders who learned were allowed to have next year. The Ottomans learned that a campaign book full of good intentions cannot replace stores that arrive. Reforms could stiffen a spine, but not regrow the muscle of an older fiscal system. A state built on land service had been inching toward cash for a century. A cash army has the cruelest god of all, punctuality. By the late 1690s, the war had become a negotiation conducted with gunpowder. Armies wintered nearer to permanent magazines. Forts were rebuilt in the new style. Plague and hunger chose which petitions a scribe would answer. Belgrade's fall and recovery told both courts the same truth. You cannot keep a city by proclamation. You keep it with bridges that hold and mills that turn when the wind does not. The peace wrote the war into law. At Karlowitz in 1699, ambassadors spread maps on tables, called rooms chambers, and converted fortresses into lines and lines into signatures. English and Dutch mediators learned that tea and patience are the same commodity. The Habsburgs received almost all of Hungary and Transylvania. The Commonwealth took back Podolia. Venice held the Morea for a while. Russia's peace would be inked a year later at Constantinople. Azov, the prize that said the north shore of the Black Sea, would learn a new grammar. The lines did what lines always do. They made loss look straight. Step back, and you can make this into a slogan about Ottoman decline and European rise. The closer view is harder and more useful. You can track the outcome in receipts. Who fed their horses better in August? Whose powder trains arrived unspoiled? Who replaced dead captains with competent men instead of cousins, who paid for boats before they needed bridges. You can also track it in patience. Which side was still able, after a decade of reverses, to gather its will into a single well-timed blow, and which side was still arguing about last year when this year arrived? Stand finally where the war ends, not on a battlefield, but in a quiet room with a clerk and a penknife. He trims a quill and copies the treaty into the register. In the margin, he notes the date and the names of the envoys. Then he shuts the book and blows out the candle because wax is money and money is war. Outside, soldiers from far countries barter buttons for bread in a market that looks like it never closed. Empires do not collapse or triumph all at once. They win or lose the right to make next year's schedule and to expect other people to keep it.